You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel. Oh, are you there? You're there, but I don't know if you can hear me or not. Oh. All right, well, everything was working fine on the test today, but it looks like we're already off to a rocking start. Are you there? Can you hear me yet? You there?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. I can hear you and I can see you. Yeah, that was weird. It was like everything was fine, and then all of a sudden, it just... I go on,
Yeah.
I say I'm Eric Vansel, and you're just like blankly looking at the screen. I'm like, this would be the part where you say your name. And you are?
Daryl Sanders.
All right. And of course, we're your hosts for this show. Although maybe not quite technically there today. We'll keep monitoring the situation as it goes through, but hey, whatever. It's live TV, right, guys? All right, so the interesting thing about this, now this is something that has been announced a little while ago, but of course, we just haven't had a chance to get to it. I mean, there was obviously some top 5 lists that we wanted to do that people have been requesting, and then there's, of course, there was the Obi-Wan series that we covered last week, but they did announce, out of nowhere it seemed, that they're going to be doing this Mandalorian movie now, and that it's going to be released in 2026. Reports originally had it at 2025. Now it's 2026. And it looks like it's going to be called The Mandalorian and Grogu. So what information do you have on this thing? Because I found this to be really fascinating. And that's part of what I want to discuss tonight is not only what we think about the movie, but also what's this going to mean for season 4?
Well, yeah. So some of the information that I've gathered thus far is one that we're getting this movie. There was talks about it for some time, but we weren't sure what was going to happen, and now we actually know that is going to be the next film in the Star Wars franchise. Like I said, it's eyeing June 2024 as a start date for production. It's unknown if Pedro will appear on screen in the film. So let's see. It was recently announced we'll begin shooting sooner than some may have anticipated. They're rolling on season 4 of the series. A source close to the production confirmed to Collider that the film is eyeing a June start date. So they kind of get things pre-production kind of going. Then the summer kickoff is, in June. Is once again written by Favreau. And season 4 is still planned. Though, because they had a whole bunch of production delays, but Disney has not yet set a date when we can expect a new episode. So to that point, we have that information so far. Now in the film, I'm sure we're probably going to see Katie Sackhoff's character, Bo-Katan, Emily Swallow as the armorer. And of course, Giancarlo Esposito as Moff Gideon. So I think that's where everything is kind of leading.
Yeah, well, okay. So basically, the only thing that I can add to that as far as what I had found out when reading about it or whatever is the fact that it looks like it's going to take place more or less between seasons 3 and 4. So what's going to happen is it's going to follow with everything in season 3. It's going to pretty much pick up where it left off, and then the movie's going to lead into season 4. And if you remember, one of the interesting things that we had said a long time ago was what they could do. Now, we were, of course, talking about the whole Mandoverse, but they could do individual seasons or whatever of each of these shows And then much like an Avengers movie, you have a Mandalorian movie that then brings everything together and maybe ties up that storyline and thereby tying up that phase. And then they can go into the subsequent seasons of the shows and then do it again. So it almost looks like that's what they're doing with this, but they seem to just be focusing on the Mandalorian series itself. I also find it interesting that it's called The Mandalorian and Grogu.
Oh, I mean, that gives hints who's still around.
Well, I mean, and
Number
we
one.
know that he's
We
still,
kind of figured that would happen anyway. But
yeah,
you see what I'm saying? I mean, because we know he's not going to be killed off, or something strange happens to him, at least
right.
not yet.
Not yet.
So one of the things that I've also read is that this is also a unifying film, which is supposed to unify the events of not only the Mandalorian, Ahsoka, Book of Boba Fett, and the Skeleton Crew. So Skeleton Crew even plays a part into this. So, and that's a series that we still haven't heard a whole lot of, and we haven't, seen a lot, but it's anticipated that it's dropping this year. So
Yeah,
now it's kind of can make us wonder too. Like, all right, is Skeleton Crew like a limited series type thing, or is it going to go on for a while after this film? It begs a lot of different questions.
Well, unfortunately, Lucasfilm is great at making us beg a lot of questions. But a bigger one, and this may have been answered, I don't know, maybe I just forgot, but when does I know Skeleton Crew takes place around the time of The Mandalorian, but specifically when?
Let me double check this so I'll make sure I'm getting,
Yeah, because
facts. If I'm not mistaken, it's taking place almost between, I think I want to say between season 3 and 4 of Mandalorian, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, then that would make perfect sense then, because if that is the case, then what that means is that it's going to be taking place at the same time as the movie does. Dragonfly is with us. He says, "Good evening, fellows." Good evening, Dragonfly. It's good to have you with us. And again, while you guys are watching, feel free to chat in live about your thoughts about any of the stuff that we're talking about, because there's just a lot that we can unpack with this. You found something?
Yeah. Nice. Once again, another great quote I love.
Absolutely. Right. That's following our top 5 favorite quotes, right?
Exactly. Right. So it won't say specifically, but it just says it's going over it crosses through the events of Mandalorian and Ahsoka, but it's supposed to take place 9 years after Return of the Jedi.
Oh, 9 years after Return of the Jedi. So The Mandalorian season 1 starts out roughly 5 or 6 years after.
6 years.
Which,
Right.
if every season is a year, would put it right at that time period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I think it's 6 years after Return of the Jedi. So this would be season 3.
Ahsoka takes place when, because it overlaps.
Yeah, I know.
That, a lot of these, and that's the whole thing. It's kind of almost like how Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith, like how those overlap, and that's what I think they're kind of trying to do. Like almost where we saw Ahsoka as she's still, in the midst of the Clone Wars, we're still hearing like Order of 66 has been obviously initiated and everything like that. So I think that's what they're kind of doing. They're just trying to unify like a bunch of different storylines between Ahsoka, Mandalorian, and Skeleton Crew because they're all taking place around the same time.
Well, and that could be. But I mean, the thing is almost like between what seasons too, because with Ahsoka, I almost want to say, and I mean, again, Ahsoka could actually be the one exception to this rule, but it almost seems like what they're doing is they're making these series actually take place around the time they're released, right? Because like the Book of Boba Fett, we know, takes place pretty much between seasons 2 and 3. And that's when it came out. Because we were always joking that Book of Boba Fett was really Mandalorian season 2.5 because you had one full episode of that show that was dedicated to Din, not to Boba. So it was kind of like, wait a second, I thought the show was called The Book of Boba Fett. Why am I getting a full-blown Mandalorian episode in this? And so Ahsoka being released after season 3, I mean, maybe that's when it takes place, or maybe you're right. Maybe it does overlap the other seasons. It's really hard to tell, too, with Ahsoka, because she pops up in season 2.
Yeah, so Ahsoka is the events of Ahsoka in the Mandalorian season 3 run concurrently.
Okay, that makes sense.
So they're happening at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, Dragonfly basically says the Mandalorian movie might help to set up the sequel movies, while, like Daryl said, trying to tie up loose ends from the other series. Yeah, I mean, it's a little early. I mean, if you were doing the setup, what you would have to do is almost go back to the Aftermath trilogy of books, because it's really in the last, let's see, there's Aftermath, Life Debt, Empire's End. That's what it was called. So Empire's End is pretty much the book that starts to set up the First Order a little bit. You have General Hux's father. You have a few other people. You, of course, have she's Admiral Sloane at that point. You have a bunch of other characters that are starting to roughly form the First Order at that point. So you could do something like that, because that particular trilogy of books takes place around this time, maybe a hair earlier. So you're right. I mean, it could end up setting up maybe some of the framework or the foundation of the sequel trilogy in that sense. Although, again, I think that it would depend on how many seasons these shows are going to go, because technically, unless they do some significant time jumps, I would think that they probably wouldn't set it up until much later in the run of the series, right? Because, I mean, again, if they do an Andor-like time jump, then sure, you can do whatever you want. But if it's going to be this organic, every season is a year, basically, or around that point, you might need to be about 10 seasons in before you really start to set up the sequel trilogy, because don't forget, we're still like 25 years away from it, pretty much. Maybe 20. So now you're about the distance, like where The Mandalorian is now, particularly this movie or even the upcoming season 4, it would roughly be around the same distance to The Force Awakens as Revenge of the Sith is to A New Hope. So if that puts it into some perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just really going to be interesting on how they try to do this. We've seen, and this is what concerns me. So we've seen Star Wars try to consolidate. I won't say consolidate, but basically tie up the stories. We saw that in the whole sequel trilogy. Now, admittedly, we know things weren't planned. We know things were rushed, and they were changing directors left and right, and all this other crap. So, fortunately, with this, we don't have that problem, because essentially, outside of Skeleton Key, which means Skeleton Crew.
Well, you haven't made that mistake in a while.
Well, we haven't talked about.
Well, but no, I mean, you've actually been pretty good. You've been hitting the whole Skeleton Crew thing like right out the gate. This is the first time, because you used to do that when we were first talking about. Well, actually, we both did, honestly. Because, once again, neither one of us really care about this show yet. I just want to frame that. I want to put that out there again, in case people are wondering. Neither one of us really care about Skeleton Crew. This is going to be another one of those shows we're probably going to review and be like, here we go. We got to do it. Star Wars channel. But they could win us over in the first episode. Like we could watch it and it might be like our favorite series of all time. I don't know. But as it stands right now, and I'm sure you feel the same way, especially because you keep forgetting the title.
Yeah.
It's not really something that we're necessarily, dying for over here.
Well, so where I was going with all that was that okay, at least with Mandalorian and Ahsoka and Book of Boba Fett, that was all done essentially by Favreau and Filoni.
Right.
This Skeleton Crew, however, is done by John Watts and Christopher Ford. That's who it was created
yeah,
by.
okay, that's true.
So, because where I was going with it was like, okay, well, if all of them were, so if they were all created and written by the same person, then cool, because then now it's, you know the whole story. Now you're trying to collaborate with another creator and another director as far as okay, like how are these characters going to play into the world that you've already established. So John Watts is the actual director. Chris Ford is writing the series.
Okay, but here's a point though. I agree
Although
with
Filoni
you.
and Favreau do provide this producing support, so I will mention that.
Well, and I mean, that means about as much as J.J. Abrams being the executive producer of The Last Jedi. It's still Ryan Johnson's movie, right? And I mean,
Right.
he was executive producer and he still had no idea. I mean, when he did The Rise of Skywalker, he was like, whoa, I got a mess to clean up. But here's the point, though.
Mm-hmm.
Before people start to jump on us, because I could see a certain type of person watching us right now going, wait a second, Andor's written by somebody completely different and done by a different showrunner. But see, the difference, though, is that it doesn't take place in this time period. That's the key. See, it doesn't matter if you have a different director, different writer, when they're writing for a different era. Where your point comes into play is the fact that you're playing in the same sandbox as Filoni and Favreau.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing to note is that Obi-Wan, well, that doesn't count either because that's a different era. But it does give you a little bit of a different flavor and some of the insight that maybe when you have a different showrunner, what happens, right? Because I was Deborah Chow. And while I don't think it was significantly different from some of the other series that we've seen, it does feel a little bit different. So I think you're right. I think that that's an important distinction, is the fact that if this is done by a different group of people, but it's in the same era, it's right in that same time period. And especially if you're going to have some of the characters pop up in the movie, I mean, what's that going to look like?
Exactly. And that's my whole thing. It's just how are you going to marry those two together and hopefully be on one accord, because that's what a big problem was with the sequel trilogy, is that now you had J.J. Abrams kick it off, then you had Ryan Johnson, and then J.J. had to come back and then he had to try to tie up not only the sequel trilogy, but he had to connect it all to the original trilogy. I mean, it was just a huge task to try to do. And once again, it just depends on, and it really also depends on the success of Skeleton Crew, because, like you said, we initially don't care about it. So until we care about it, you know what I'm saying? Like that could be the thing that's like, oh man, this would have been cool if it wasn't for those Skeleton Crew people. It's almost like Scooby Doo. It's like, I know I got with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids. Wow. So it's. And in this case, that's true because Skeleton Crew deals with kids. So
I was going to say, it might actually be the Scooby-Doo of the Star Wars universe. We don't know.
Exactly. So, and that's where the concern is. And especially when it seems like they're trying to end the series. You would hate to have such a lackluster, because we already kind of felt the way about season 3 of Mandalorian anyway. So now, you're going to the big screen and you're trying to tell this giant story. I don't know. Like I said, it's interesting.
Well, here's another thing to look at too. They obviously are pretty confident in it, because if they're already planning on including characters from Skeleton Crew in this thing, that means one of two things. Or it could be both. They don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. One, they must have extreme confidence in these characters, at least. Maybe not necessarily the show itself, but definitely in the characters. The second thing that it could mean is that these particular characters are key, right?
No.
Well, I had to do it. They are key
Yeah.
to the story. So, in other words, they must factor in pretty heavily into the direction in which they want the story to go. Because by and large, what we know about this is another thing I actually didn't bring up at the beginning of the show. But one of the things that we do know is that when we left The Mandalorian in season 3, when we left Din, he basically was settling on Navarro, and he was pretty much going to just do jobs for the New Republic. He was pretty much a freelancer at this point. Mandalore has been retaken. He's not really dealing with that. He's going to pretty much just settle in his new home and take jobs. And so what I think is going to happen is what you're going to see is that's going to be the major plot point of this new movie. I think it's going to focus on him taking different jobs. And of course, it's probably going to be one of those things where he goes on a mission. And it's almost like these different quests where they kind of lead into each other, and it reveals a much bigger challenge for our main characters. And the Skeleton Crew characters, from even what little we know, because we know very little about that show, very little about the characters, the plot, any of that stuff. But from what we do know, you can see how that could slot in pretty easily to this direction that they want to take The Mandalorian, at least for this film.
Well, yeah, and to some of your points, one of the things that I have to mention is that what if this is already like I'm getting the sense that this was planned before they even started any of this.
Yeah, wouldn't that be
Before
nice?
Mandalorian season 1 began, was this the plan?
Man, I hope so, because that would actually mean that how progressive would that be for Lucasfilm if they had actually planned that far in advance and they're executing it and they're placing all their pieces? And because again, here's the problem that I have with this, okay? This is the main issue. And this is the only reason why, in spite of the evidence that you just brought up, I wonder. Because the next movie was actually, well, first it was supposed to be the Patty Jenkins Rogue Squadron movie. Then they were looking at maybe a New Dawn. Last we heard, it was the Rey movie. That thing was supposed to be in production by like April of this year. And they were going to move forward with that. Then we get this announcement out of nowhere, which is basically what inspired this show tonight. Because I think the announcement came like a week or two or something. But again, our schedules were messed up, and our show schedule, of course, got affected. And we wanted to get some of the requested top fives out of the way. So it took a little while for us to actually finally talk about it. But still, it came out of nowhere. But here's another question, because this is another one that begs a big question. Gina Carano has got that lawsuit going against Lucasfilm. And part of that lawsuit, obviously, it's, she was wrongfully fired. She had, there was all this stuff. And apparently Elon Musk has gotten behind her now. So, because a lot of this stuff happened on Twitter, and a lot of what the lawsuit is about tweets, and she was fired because of these tweets. So now Elon Musk has come in, and he's providing support and all kinds of resources for her. One of the stipulations that she has is she wants her job back. She wants to play Cara Dune again. So the question is, does that happen in time for this film? Probably not. But maybe Mandalorian Season 4, we don't know. But there is the Gina Carano thing. I mean, do you think that could be a thing? Uh-oh, I think you're frozen. Yeah, he's frozen. Well, then I'll ask you guys, right? What do you guys, let me just text Daryl back real quick. Um, while we're talking about this thing, what do you guys actually think? Do you think that Gina Carano should be allowed to come back? Because here's the argument that I will make for that. I honestly never thought that she should have been fired. I thought that it was pretty much a mistake to even get rid of her in the first place. I don't really agree with the fact that no matter where you land politically, no matter where you land on virtually any topic, some of the stuff that she brought up, yeah, sure, it's dangerous for celebrities to go spouting off their personal beliefs or something because you do stand the chance of alienating your audience. Not all your audience, because a lot of your audience is actually going to, they're pretty much going to agree with you. But there is a chance that, maybe half, maybe a little bit more, you might alienate them. She was bringing up just a lot of different issues that were controversial, and not so much to the audience. Really, it was more Disney. It was like Disney's woke agenda-filled thing that they had going, that when Gina Carano was talking, she basically was just spouting off, and it was at odds with Disney, so naturally Disney took action. So again, after all that I brought up, I don't know what the last thing you heard was, really, before you had to restart. But ultimately, the question becomes, do you think that Gina Carano, with Elon Musk behind her, one of the stipulations is she gets her job back? She still wants to be a part of Star Wars. She never really wanted to not play Cara Dune. And Cara Dune, we missed her in season 3. I'll be honest, that she left a huge gap. And now that Carl Weathers is gone, and of course, Din is on Navarro, and now the administrator in real life is passed. It's pretty crazy. Now, before you answer, Dragonfly's got a couple of things. He was talking about you. He looks so mad because when your video froze.
I was because my video froze.
Yeah, but Dragonfly would like to see Cara Dune back again. It's like they reacted too quickly in firing her, and yeah, that was the thing. So I mean, look, if she goes through with this, and Elon's got a lot of resources, he's like the richest man in the world. So, I mean, there was even talk that he might buy Disney because he doesn't like what they're doing with Star Wars. He actually had said that.
Wow.
It's like, there you go. I mean, that's how
that's where you're putting your money where your mouth is.
That's what I'm saying. Take the proverbial bull by the horns. I wish I had the ability to do that. It's like, yeah, I'm really not happy with where we're. It's almost like with Paramount. If I were kind of like, yeah, I'm really not entirely into what they're doing with Star Trek. Yeah, I think I'll just buy Paramount. I mean, that's fantastic. But, I mean, again, I think Dragonfly brings up a good point that they reacted too quickly. You and I actually did an entire show based on the whole thing when it went down and how unfair we thought it was. So the question becomes then, do you think there's a shot that she could get her job back in time for this movie? I say probably not, but, stranger things, right? But Mandalorian season 4.
Yeah, I mean, maybe season 4 she can pop in. Well, no, we got shooting in June.
What, season 4 shooting in June?
Mm-hmm. Or yeah. Oh, wait.
No, they're starting the movie.
No, the movie is in June.
Yeah, the movie is in June, right?
The movie's in June.
Yeah.
Yeah, the movie's in June. So maybe for season 4, yes. I'm getting my dates mixed up. Because now Disney's starting to drop a lot of dates for stuff, and now I'm getting confused with some things.
Oh, yeah. Well, once again, I mean, that's what I was saying before you froze too. I'm not sure if you caught it or not, but because I don't know when that happened, really. I thought you were just really focused. But I always look for the blinking. I look for blinking. When I don't see you blinking for a while, I'm like, either he's really focused or there's an issue. But yeah, there was a there was a point in where, the Patty Jenkins movie was going to come out, and then the James Mangold movie was rumored to be the next one. And then the last that we heard,
Mhm.
it was going to be the Ray movie. And now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they just dropped the news that it's going to be this Mandalorian movie, which we didn't even know was a thing. We knew that they were going to try to make a movie at some point, but we honestly didn't know that this was something that was even in the cards or something that was going to happen. And now all of a sudden it's the next movie. And not only is it the next movie, but it's coming out in a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, this is like I said, a weird time, but I think it's cool. I think this could yield actually one of the better, I guess, films for Star Wars, because when you think about it, like, okay, let's just look at who we have on the table. I know you were talking about Gina Carano and how much we missed her, and that's true. And especially now with Carl Weathers gone, literally. Um, that sucks because, Grief Cargo was always, our favorite and a lot
Mhm.
of our fans' favorites. And, so he's definitely gonna be missed. And it'd have been cool for at least for him to wrap up, man. He was like this close to maybe even wrapping up Mandalorian. Now, I mentioned the fact that if they get Dennis Haysbert in there, he could play a good replacement for
Yeah,
uh
he could.
Carl Weathers.
He could.
But I'm thinking, looking at the board, right? Let's just look at the board and what we have. So we have Din, we have Grogu, we have Bo-Katan, we have whoever's left of the Mandalorians that made it out of that whole firestorm they were in against Moff Gideon. And then, of course, like I said, we have Moff Gideon. Now, remember, we still have Boba Fett and Fennec Shan um,
Mhm.
from Book of Boba Fett. We also still have Ahsoka, Sabine, and Huang, but I don't know if he's going to actually enter the fray, but who knows? He might. And then Ezra, right? From Ahsoka. So then on the villain side, you still have Gideon and Thrawn. So I'm wondering, like, is this going to be some big culminating thing? Because are we going to finally see that, like, okay, Gideon and Thrawn have been in tandem this whole time, and or was Gideon trying to bring Thrawn back, or whatever the case may be, or is Thrawn going to come and show up and see that what Gideon had going on? He's like, you know what? I like this guy. I want him on my team. That type of thing. So that could really expand um this whole story. It can blow it wide open. And I'm just really curious because I think Grogu's still at the heart of it all. And I think they still want both Gideon and Thrawn kind of want the ability to manipulate the force, because that's the one thing that's an equalizer that they just never been able to possess. But if they could find a way to do that, then they will pretty much almost be unstoppable. So I think that's really where that story is going, and I think it's going to take all hands on deck to try to keep him alive, because Thrawn has those bodies in those little casks or whatever casket things that we've seen. You know, you got a couple of Force users in Ezra and um in Ezra, Ahsoka, and Grogu technically is a Force user, but then we also have Jude Law's character from Skeleton Crew. We don't know how far or how in depth his character is. That still remains to be seen. But we do know he's a Force user. Just to what
Mm.
degree, we don't know. So it's really going to be interesting to see um, how all this stuff plays out.
Yeah, I mean, again, so you do have a lot of different characters that you could draw from. I don't know exactly how wide this thing is going to go because, again, the original thing was yes, that it was going to be a Mandoverse based movie. It
Hmm.
almost seems like because season 4 was going to be the next thing, and the movie was supposed to tie all the series together after Mandalorian season 4, but now they moved the timeline up, and now they're not they're calling it the Mandalorian and Grogu, which obviously implies, yeah, his story is not over. He's figuring prominently into this. It's probably going to be more of his development as a Mandalorian, but yet also embracing his Jedi side. So that would make sense to bring Ahsoka into that. The other thing is, like I said, I think it's going to rely heavily on he probably has a job that he's taken for the New Republic or a few, and that starts to lead him into a bigger picture. You know, it's almost like when you see a million movies like this, especially cop movies, spy movies, where, you know, it's like, okay, we want you to accomplish this mission. But in accomplishing that mission, it actually reveals a bigger crime taking place. And now it's like, ooh, you know, I got to let everybody know that what they thought was the objective has changed, because now there's this bigger thing. And the thing I was originally sent on is no more than a key. I mean, virtually all the Mission Impossibles operate on this principle. So it could do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where I think it's going to. I think most of the characters have it kind of confined to Gideon. Like, I think they think that he's the big bad guy, and they're trying to corral him, not knowing that Thrawn is really the guy that's out there. And because he's been, you know, in the unknown regions essentially, and now you have Ahsoka and all them trying to get back to the known regions, because Ezra made it back, but Sabine and Ahsoka are still there. So now you have Ezra along with Hera trying to corral everything. We know Thrawn is already back into the known galaxy now. So while Din and Bo-Katan and all the rest of them, they probably think, okay, this is just some Gideon thing. You know, now Thrawn shows up and they're probably like, well, who the heck is this guy? You know, and he's worse than Gideon. And so then now it kind of takes all the resources until Ahsoka and Sabine kind of get back to help join in the fray.
Well, and again, it's almost going back to the overlapping thing that you were talking about. I honestly think what's going to happen is this is going to be in two halves. Now, where The Mandalorian Season 4 falls into this, I have no idea at this point. And honestly, I don't even think that we're going to be able to truly speculate unless one of two things happens. Either they shoot Season 4 simultaneously with the movie, which is a possibility. They could do that. I don't know if that would be the best idea, but it could be done. If you do that, then you can see that there might be a similar trajectory happening. But until we see what transpires in the Mandalorian movie, really we need that to unlock the possible plot points of Season 4. The other thing...
Yeah, because I'm saying, I was going to ask you is, do you think the movie is the setup for 4?
Well, I do. I mean, well...
Like, is that the unifying thing of all the different shows?
No, I don't think so.
And then it's going to launch into 4?
Nope, I don't think so. That's why I think they're calling it the Mandalorian and Grogu. I think that this is basically just going to talk about what's happening with the Mandalorian and Grogu. Like Din and Grogu, right? They're going to be off on, like I said, it's going to be probably somewhat of the typical thing to where, you know, they take a mission from the New Republic, it reveals a bigger crime. I think that Thrawn is probably going to be in it. I think that you're going to have a lot of these other characters. But what I was getting to was the overlap part. See, I think that what might happen, again, who knows in the world of Lucasfilm, but you made the point about how Thrawn, Ezra, they're in the known regions now. They're kind of in the core worlds, as they're called. And I think that that is what's going to affect the Mandalorian movie and Season 4. However, and this is a very important distinction, I also think that what's happening is that Ahsoka and Sabine still being left trapped and stranded, I think that might pick up with Ahsoka Season 2. And that's where maybe the overlap happens. I don't know if they're going to deal too much with those characters in the movie. I mean, look, anything is possible. Just about anything is on the table at this point, especially because we have a very rough outline of what's happening with this movie. And it's so vague that really anything is possible. And of course, they're doing that on purpose. But I don't know. I just think that I don't necessarily think this is going to be that Avengers style film. Because one, it came up too quickly. I think that this is almost like, because here's another thing I heard, by the way. It's like I'm all over the place tonight. But here's another thing that I heard. I heard that he's actually taking a lot of what he was going to put in season 4 and putting in this movie. And so I think for season 4 now, that might actually be changing directions a little bit. So it's weird what we're up against as far as where this franchise might be going and how it might utilize its properties. Because like you said, a lot of things have changed. They've been throwing out a lot of dates that are seemingly out of nowhere. And on top of that, you're having a situation where the Mandalorian movie wasn't going to happen for maybe another couple of years. Everybody was on board for season 4. All of a sudden, you get this announcement. So it's like, okay, well, what even sparked this?
Yeah, I mean, it really is a doozy to try to, and of course we know it's still early in the game and we're just getting really a release date at this point. But of course, much like, I'm sure like us, the rest of you all out there have been speculating as well, trying to figure out, what the heck are they doing? Not necessarily in a bad way though, like just really just out of curiosity. What direction could they possibly be going in? Because we still are missing a integral part with the skeleton crew apparently. So we still need to see how that plays out and how that factors into the story. That will also give us maybe a clear picture as to, or it may confuse things even the more. I mean, who knows? But I'm really curious, but at least we'll get some answers this year in regards to that, because Skeleton Crew is slated for 2024. So
yeah, do we know what month? Have they released a month?
Skeleton Crew is,
I mean, they're probably lying to us anyway, but because that's the thing. I wonder if people are saying, oh, I wonder what's next. Because honestly, I think a lot of people have just given up and tuned out and said, you know what, this is a mess. The franchise is destroyed. I don't even know if I care anymore. It's like, if I hear that there's something somewhat good or whatever, maybe I'll check it out. But and don't get me wrong, I mean, the fan base is still large. I just think that a lot of people are weary of all the mistakes and everything that's happening, as you and I have said in other shows, including shows where this was more or less the topic. This once invincible, pretty much bulletproof franchise has just been, blown to crap. It's basically at the point when Obi-Wan in episode 3 was like, well, we're still flying half a ship. That's what Kathleen Kennedy is saying to Lucasfilm right now. It's still half a ship, right? It's technically airborne. We're still able to navigate it. And they better do something significant really quick, because if they don't, they're going to run this franchise so far into the ground that the only way that it could possibly be resurrected is if Lucas himself retakes the helm and does new stuff. And I'm not even saying anybody might be in love with the stuff he does, because remember, some of the directions he wanted to take episodes 7 through 9 were a little, at least on paper, they were a little strange. And everybody initially hated the prequels. It's only now that people are looking back on it and go, well, maybe it wasn't so bad. Of course, they still had their problems. But still, at least it was his. And even when people were whining about it, when Lucas was doing it, it's kind of like, well, it was his.
Yeah. before we even continue to your question, no, it doesn't. Still doesn't say when it's actually being released. It just says 2024.
2024. But you're right.
So
I mean, we're gonna have some answers. Is that the only?
I don't.
Actually, in thinking about it, is that the only show? Well, yeah, not movie because we know no movies being released this year. But is that the only show that's going to be dealing with this time period that's coming out this year? I think it is.
Yeah, I think so.
Because we're going to get the Acolyte, but of course that's High Republic time.
Yeah, public.
We're going to get the Bad Batch, but that's after
Bad Batch.
That's episode 3 and 4. Visions, which we don't even know when that takes place. And I think wasn't Tales of the Jedi coming out this year as well?
Yeah, and that
I should know. We just did a show, everything coming out in 2024. Right?
Yeah. Plus, that's we know Tales of the Jedi for the most part is all older stuff. So
right,
that's kind of the premise of that. That show. So yeah, I mean, it's just I don't know. It's really hard to kind of and too soon, I guess, for us to really truly speculate on it. But it's fun to do, to be honest. But with Mandalorian and Grogu as the title of the film, that says a lot because we know that the focus is really more so on them. Maybe some of these other characters pop in from time to time to, I don't want to say give advice, but help them out of situations at times. And then, but I think the story is really going to be focused on the development of their bond and those characters, because as we last saw, Grogu saved Din by, keeping back that big blast of fire that was, coming his way after that explosion. So Grogu's definitely gotten stronger in the Force, obviously, because, stuff like that used to, would tire him out. He'd be fast asleep before anything. And after that, he was still cool. So I don't know.
Well, that's another good point too, though.
It's really good, though.
No, that's actually a really great point, because how much older is he going to be? Obviously Grogu, the older that he gets, he's like 50 or whatever when we first met him. So now he's like 53, maybe 54. Wow, he's like my age. Yes, I'm as old as Grogu. But
there's a startling resemblance.
Yeah, Baby Eric t-shirts coming your way.
Yes, Baby E.
Yeah. I'll just make like a little babyfy myself. I'm sure there's an app out there somewhere that would do that for me.
Oh yeah, AI.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But I mean, I think that as they show him getting older, first of all, you got to wonder if they even know when they want to stop this. Like, is it going to be a 4 seasons and it's done? Is this movie going to be the thing that actually puts the bow on it, even though they do say that there's going to be a season 4? I mean, we don't really know. Like, they haven't really made any announcements. And so the point being is, I don't know if they're going to do any time jumps. Are they going to keep Grogu more or less at this age and maybe just start to show him, like you said, being a little bit less tired after he uses a Force, or little things like that are implying that he's getting stronger and growing? Because we were wondering is he ever going to talk? Like, really talk?
Yeah.
It just, I don't know. Because on one hand, I think that would be kind of cool, but on the other hand, I think that it would probably cut down on the merchandising, and, it would be kind of weird. After like all this time to start to hear him talk, it would be odd.
And what would that sound like?
I know.
If he did talk, are you going to try to do the whole Frank Oz thing, or are you going to try to, just give him a little kid's voice? I mean, what does that even sound like?
Exactly. Well, and the other thing is the talking backwards thing. Is that a Yoda thing, or is that a species-wide thing?
Right.
We don't know. And these are things that have to be worked out. And again, I mean, I'm sure that given the the marketing of Grogu is kind of a cash cow. They certainly don't want to destroy that. They don't want to ruin that. So I don't know. I mean, it just seems like they might just keep it this way and maybe continue his story in books or comics or something where it doesn't matter what he sounds like. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so okay, let's change directions just slightly. Do you think this movie is necessary?
Well, I think a better question would be, do I think the movie is necessary right now? Because yes, I do think the movie is necessary. And I don't know, I was going to say no, it's not necessary right now, but from an in-universe perspective, probably not. Although it would be fun because, again, it's kind of like, okay, he's at a good spot where you can make a movie because he's like, hey, I'll take on missions for the New Republic. And there's all kinds of things, he could get into stuff with the New Republic, but then maybe, I don't know, like the Pikes or, some other criminal organization like Crimson Dawn or Black Sun or something could come out. And I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do with that story. But, excuse me. But here's the thing. I would have felt it was more necessary maybe after season 4, maybe if you do another Ahsoka season. I don't know, because it just seems like if you're going to tie this stuff together, we just need a little bit more advancement from the individual shows. On the other hand, from a very real world business perspective, if you look at all the possible movies that are out there, you have the Rey movie, which people are like, I didn't really care for the sequel trilogy that much. Then, of course, you had the Dawn of the Jedi movie, but that, who knows what that's going to look like. So if you make a Mandalorian movie, that's a successful property right now, and everybody's familiar with the characters, at least enough of the core fan base that the casual fans could be looped in pretty quickly because there's a lot of source material that they can go back to if they want to prepare for it, or if they see the movie and go, yeah, that was pretty cool, let me go check it out, and they go back to Disney Plus and start binge watching all the seasons. So I think it's the safest movie for them to make as a first film back after the sequels.
Because you have an established
world, characters, the whole shot. It's built in.
Yeah.
All you're doing is continuing that. And like I said, for people that want, I mean, you have your core fan base that have already been watching all these shows. The casual fans that you're going to loop in, if they haven't seen anything and they're not that familiar with it, they have time to actually watch it. Mm-hmm. Especially, they made the announcement, and then I'm sure they're going to start giving regular updates, and then, of course, you'll have the eventual trailers. They'll have time to binge watch it if they want. And, of course, you're going to get the ones that are just, like I said, they're so out of touch, they don't even... It's like when the thing is in the theater, they're going to be like, oh, there's a Marvel movie. Hey, Mandalorian thing, let's check that out. I'm not even sure, is that Boba Fett? You're going to get those guys. You are. It's unavoidable. So for those guys, they go in, they're introduced maybe to this world through that film. And now they're like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. And then they find out that there's like 3 seasons of The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka and all this stuff. It's like, oh, well, I can go back now and binge watch all this stuff, and that enriches my enjoyment. So, I mean, from that perspective, man, this is probably the best choice that they can make.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, because like you said, it's already been established. You already have, your characters and set, and all you got to do is pretty much expound upon it. But now you just have to really try to figure out like where you're going to go with it. Mm-hmm. Like you said, what's the end game now? Because we're getting closer to that time. I mean, granted, the Mandoverse could go on for a while because you still have, like you said, 20 years before you even start to hit the the sequel trilogy, so you still have enough time to do a bunch of stuff. But I don't think, of course, we're going to get like season 18 of The Mandalorian or anything like
No.
that. I think
Well, it doesn't
it's probably
happen
going
with
to it's
any of those shows. It's like
right,
probably a
exactly. I
Filoni
think
thing. It's probably 4 or 5.
yeah, I mean, yeah, guys, yeah, I was going to say about 5 tops for that show, and then maybe some things will be carried on or picked up in Ahsoka and things like that because we still have to figure out, when that's coming back and you know what's the story going on in there. So it's an interesting thing that they're it's cool that at least they're starting with something we already know, and that's cool. It's like, okay, the next film, because remember, like when we got the sequel trilogy, we knew nothing. Like, okay, who's this stormtrooper kid? Who's the girl? And we heard the original cast was coming back, so we were happy about that. But we didn't know what the story was. We didn't know how any of this was going to go down. So at least with this, at least we already kind of are familiar with characters in the world and everything like that. Those who have been watching, and if you haven't, you still have, like you said, Eric. They have enough time to catch up on it right now, or if they see it, they can now go back and get like, oh, okay, this is why they said that, or this is why they did X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, it's the safest bet. I mean, it's
Yeah.
clearly it's the thing that you would want to do because you and I have talked about this. Now, the next movie that they make has to be successful and it has to be good. And you have a lot of that built in with the Mandalorian franchise. It's almost like a franchise within a franchise in a way because you had the
Hmm.
Mandoverse, right? I mean, you've got these
Right.
established characters that are essentially kind of their own thing. You could just spin off of that entire thing because, like you said, even if they stop after, let's say, season 4 is the last season, or maybe they do a season 5 to wrap some things up. Maybe they do a season 2, possibly 3 of Ahsoka. I don't know if they're going to do a Book of Boba Fett, although I know Tamira Morrison would love to reprise the role. But he can reprise the role in
Hmm.
any of the shows. But,
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say that they really need to make sure that this next movie is a success. And I think that pretty much the other thing that they could do is if it is a success, is you don't even need the shows after a while. Like, say all those shows wrap up their seasons, right? You could just,
Hmm.
I don't know, every 3 or 4 years, put another Mandalorian movie out.
Well, here's another reason why those shows have to be successful. Um, is that because number one, they've just made Filoni this creative director,
Mm.
and we've always heard of him being like the heir apparent to George Lucas. So if he fails at the films, I mean, he's been holding steady with the series, so people still have faith in him. Season 3, yeah, but outside of that, okay, you've been hitting it out the ballpark for the most part. If this film doesn't deliver, now that really will tarnish not only Star Wars but Filoni as like any of, I guess, all the accolades that he has received up until this point. It's kind of like, but you didn't win the championship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's what people are banking on. It's like, okay, can you win? Can you win the big one? Can you get a Star Wars movie out that's good that people are like, yeah, that was awesome. I want to
Well,
see that again. Or I mean, it's going to really, people aren't like, okay, it's going to take 20 years later before, like, that Filoni movie wasn't that bad. Like,
yeah, whatever
so
happened
it's
to
like,
him?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's get him back, 40 years later. So
Dave
are
Filoni
we
ruined my
really
childhood.
Yep, exactly. So now, you really have to look at it from that standpoint too. And I think that's why it's very important for Filoni. And I think that's probably why he's doing this as a safe bet, because he's like, look, I already got this kind of rocking and rolling and established, because he can't fail, because after him, I mean, like you said, at this point, you might have to bring back George Lucas, because no one's really has been able to successfully hold on to it. JJ had an early success with The Force Awakens. Okay, cool. But then Ryan Johnson dropped it. JJ tried to pick it back up for The Rise of Skywalker. That fell flat for a lot of fans. So you can't count on JJ anymore. You can't. And now you have to look at, someone like Filoni, like I said, who's the heir apparent, who's supposed to be, hey, the guy who completely understands Star Wars. He's delivered great content from the Clone Wars animation, along with the assistance of George Lucas to begin with. But then there was Rebels. We know he's great with animation. Even with Tales of the Jedi, great, phenomenal. But okay, when it comes to live action now, you got 2 good seasons of Mandalorian. You got 1 season of Mandalorian that was lackluster. So he needs a win. He needs another win in the live action category to keep the Mandalorian series going and not people lose faith in it. But he also needs a win because now he's this creative director now who's responsible for the creative direction of the entire franchise. And if his movie fails,
Yeah.
you're
that's a
pretty
good
much done with
point.
the franchise.
That's a really good point. I didn't even think about it, but you're right. I mean, this is the first film that's going to be made under his tenure as creative director. So there's a lot riding on that. And don't forget, I think he's learned some lessons, but let's face it, he had somewhat of a lackluster start with live action with Ahsoka. There were a lot of mistakes.
True. Yeah, that's true.
So
I forgot about to mention that, but that's a very good point. Very
so
good point.
it's one of those things where you're like, okay. And again, I think if I remember correctly that Favreau was the one who was actually going to be directing and making this movie.
And that's where I was, you kind of read my mind a little bit, because that's where I was going next. Because he is so much the the heir apparent to George Lucas, he may be suffering from the same George Lucas problem. He can tell great stories, he just can't direct them.
Right.
So maybe he writes the stories, and then you get someone like Favreau who can actually be like his Lawrence Kasdan or something.
Well, it would really be more like, it wouldn't even have to be his Kasdan, because Filoni can write. I think actually Filoni is probably a better writer. It's his Irvin Kershner. That's who it needs to be. Yeah, Kasdan's the guy that wrote the script.
But right. Forgot. I'm getting everything backwards today. I got that Yoda problem.
Yoda moment.
But yes,
extreme
Irvin
senior
Kershner.
moment. Yeah. Because you can count Richard Marquand too, but they sort of had Kershner was the guy who was really where it flowed pretty well. And so absolutely. If Lucas had been smart enough to actually get directors, he could have even directed The Phantom Menace himself, just like he did Episode 4. But then for Episode 2 and 3, get somebody else in there and, do that. But he didn't. And you're right. If Filoni maybe has that same weakness, maybe he's a little too much like Lucas, then what you could do at that point is you could say, okay, look, here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to get somebody who is a really good director. And also, maybe you do get somebody in there too that can just look over the script and punch it up if necessary. I mean, that might not necessarily, but again, the reason why I say that is because a lot of Filoni's masterful writing has been in the animated world. Ahsoka,
you can't write that for a live action.
Not so much. I mean, it had its moments, but I think the writing suffered a little bit too. So he might want to get a little bit of support for that too. I'm not saying that somebody else has to completely write it for him, but check and balance.
Spielberg. I mean, but Lucas had it with Spielberg, and that's what I'm saying.
Well, and Spielberg was technically, I mean, he was even directing scenes, and Spielberg was sort of that all-around filmmaker that Lucas can bounce stuff off of, and Spielberg could look at the direction, the writing, the cinematography, the everything. He looked at the whole,
Mhm.
the big picture. Let's see, Dragonfly's got something that he just popped in there. So as it populates in our chat, there it comes. Boy, everything's slow today. Our minds are slow.
I'm just
Our
slow.
chat's
Computers.
slow. Yeah, he said he really stressed he didn't want other directors doing the prequels because they would change his vision too much. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I understand in Lucas's mind what he was thinking. But that's
Mhm.
why Empire Strikes Back still stands as arguably the best movie of the franchise
Mhm. Yep.
because it did change his vision in ways that it needed to be changed. You think of all the iconic scenes and lines, like the whole Han Solo I know thing. It wasn't written like
Mhm.
that. It
Nope.
was done like that, and Kirshner had the genius mind to let Harrison Ford go, yeah, look, he wouldn't say that, and to improvise it. Now, I mean, obviously, Lucas still had to approve everything or whatever, but the point is, a
Sure.
lot of that day-to-day stuff on the set that was going on would not have happened if Lucas had also directed The Empire Strikes Back. It probably would have been a very different movie.
I
And,
agree.
that's that's why I basically say that the prequel trilogy maybe is not, let's just say, I'm trying to be somewhat diplomatic. That's why I'm choosing my words.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's just say screw it. Hate it on as much as
Yeah.
it was. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just blasted. People are like, Lucas ruined my childhood because those movies could have been so much better. I mean, if you guys want to really have some fun, go back and watch our reviews of them that we recently did in our whole What is Star Wars series. We got a whole playlist of reviews where we review every single movie in the franchise. And when we were reviewing the prequels, the same themes kept coming up. Okay, this is good, this is bad, but they could have been so much better because the stories were great. It's just the execution. Lucas
Right.
doesn't know how to direct actors. It's just like, what are you talking about? Just say it. It's on the
It's like a
page.
coach telling
Right.
it's like a coach telling him like, "Hey, go down there, catch the ball, and run to the end zone."
Exactly.
What's the problem?
Just catch it and go run and avoid people
Don't get
on the way
tackled.
down.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's not exactly how a coach.
Right. It's got to be more subtle than that. You got to. So that's the thing, is the fact that they just could have been so much better, and I think they would have lived up more to the original trilogy if you had tapped an Irvin Kershner to direct them. I mean, he's still
Mhm.
executive producer, he's still overseeing it, he's still writing, he's still doing enough. But you can't just say that. I mean, not to mention the fact that the other reason why they suffered so badly was because it was the first time people were really acting to that degree in a digital world. You're in like this,
Yeah.
basically this warehouse that's lined with green, and it's just like you're the
Green and
only
blue.
actor, and it's like, all
Yep.
right, here's the scene. You're in the middle of this crazy world or
Yeah.
whatever, and
It
the
almost feels like
city.
it's like an improv thing, like, "All
Yeah,
right, everybody,"
yeah,
and yeah, for actors, especially at that time, like you said, Eric, that was such a new technology and a new thing, which once again, kudos to George Lucas for being that type of innovator. However, on the flip side of that, though, now you're dealing with actors who aren't used to that type of. Now you have actors can do that now, but before and now with the advent of the volume, which you can even add to it as well, it makes it a little bit easier. But now, it's not so foreign to actors now. But in
right,
98, 99, yeah, that was
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it was just
Maybe a scene or two, not the whole entire movie.
and then it's kind of like, okay, well, how should I deliver this? It's like, well, just it's there. What's your problem? Yeah. Just read the thing and say it. Why is this hard? I mean, that's kind of how Lucas is. He wouldn't even really give him anything. They would just say the line. He'd be like, "All right, cut. That's cool." And they're like, "Well, wait a minute. I mean, do you want to do?" I mean, it's just He
Yeah.
just doesn't know how to properly direct actors. He's just not one of those guys. He's more of a storyteller, a producer, you know, writer, visionary. He's not a really good boots on the ground director for actors. And that's the main, a lot of people don't even realize this. The main job of the director is to direct the actors. That's like the core thing. Make sure you get the best takes from the actors, the best performance, what's necessary, nurture them a little bit. That's what you're all about. Because there's other people that are controlling a lot of the other elements. The director's really supposed to focus on, obviously they're focusing on the big picture, but you're trying to get what you need out of the talent in order to make the film. And unfortunately, Lucas he's not that guy.
Just doesn't have it.
Doesn't have it. And I think that Filoni maybe is proving to be the same way. I don't know if he necessarily suffers, but I mean, look at that. We keep picking on it, but look at that whole scene between Ezra and Sabine. It sounded like they were just reading cue cards to each other.
Right.
It wasn't even a real conversation.
I know.
I'm like, I don't even understand this.
Especially when they have this whole build up, like Sabine's all like, man,
yes,
Ezra, she's, and then it's like, oh, there you are. Like, what?
Well, and because especially it was like when they were riding into, whatever. That was the main scene that I'm talking about, is when they're riding into see Thrawn, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And they had that whole conversation, probably like a 5-minute conversation or something. And it didn't even just felt like they were delivering lines. It didn't feel like they were really communicating. And I was just thinking to myself, what am I watching right now? Because like you said, they built this moment up to be so strong, and it's just But again, I mean, I think I should stress the fact, though, that we did enjoy the actual series. Like, if you haven't seen the Ahsoka series, we're not trying to dump on it too much. There were some issues, clearly. But overall, it is enjoyable. It does give you a lot of little canon nuggets. It's like a new term I've just come up with. There's a lot of really cool things that advance the story that are pretty necessary if you're a Star Wars fan. I would say it's almost required viewing. I still say the original trilogy, the Clone Wars, the prequels, probably Rebels. And then if you move on from there, do the sequels at your own risk. Bad Batch, Tales of the Jedi. You can start to add some of the other stuff. But definitely, if you're into the Mandalorian and all that stuff, then you got to check out Ahsoka. It's all tied together because it's the Mandoverse. But I don't know. Favreau doing the movie gives me a lot of hope. Let's put it like that.
Yeah. Well, I guess we just got to wait and see. Once again, as more information comes in, we'll be definitely delivering it to you, and hope we can start putting pieces of this puzzle together to get the big picture.
Yeah, this is basically the first shot off the bow, so to speak. I mean, the initial announcement, obviously, as this thing develops, we'll continue to do shows on it, update you guys, chat about it, see where we're going. So, we'll just have to see. All right, so we should be live again this Friday at 11. Of course, I'm sure we haven't really figured anything out yet, have we?
Well, there's some Acolyte news. There's some things.
That's true. There is.
Moving on that front. So we might dig into that a little bit. I think there might even be some things going on with the whole Rey film. I think I've heard some stuff regarding that. So there's a little bit of assortment of announcements that are going to be coming up pretty soon. So we might cover that on Friday.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we do, the Acolyte might not be a bad thing, because at least that's coming out this year.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it'll probably be the Acolyte, but you know the drill. Just keep an eye on the channel, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and of course the notification bell so you guys are notified whenever we go live. You'll be notified when we're about to do a show. It's a good way to keep informed. You know, because I get it. Look, not everybody's going to... I mean, we would love for everybody to watch every week, but, you know, sometimes we're going to cover a topic where you're like, you know what? I'm not really... Maybe I'll watch this later. Then there might be other ones where you guys are like waiting at, 5 to 8 or 5 to 11 or whatever, like just waiting for us to get on the air because you can't wait to watch the topic. Well, if you click the notification bell, then you'll know what it is we're going to be talking about that. All right. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up on this Monday Star Wars night. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.